I wouldn't say that I had trauma and it caused ADHD. What I definitely relate to is that I was a really sensitive kid in a non-sensitive household.
Rox Pink is back.
But this time, she is joined by renowned psychologist Jo Perkins
to dissect her ADHD and help understand the root of her complex behaviours.
Anyone with ADHD will know the amount of negative messages someone receives across their lifespan. It kind of makes sense that you don't believe the compliment. A good outcome can sometimes happen because you didn't actually do anything. You're not built to be perfect.
Why do you think you were so desperate to please your dad?
I think because he wasn't forthcoming with hugs or I love you, but I knew if I won a race or I got an A, I could crack a nod and a smile, and that was everything to me. So I took some time away from my relationship with him, which is brutal, and it's been your hero, it's been the only one you've ever wanted to love you, and obviously my mum isn't here. So yeah, it's hard. I always hold in the back of my mind, maybe he's watching.
Jo, could you walk Rox through why she felt that way?
The fact that it's there, it's about...
This episode is dedicated to anyone who feels like they would benefit from therapy, but hasn't yet got the confidence to book the appointment. Give me just a second while I explain these balls hurtling towards my face. Turning over a new leaf can be so difficult for us with ADHD. Trying to set New Year's resolutions can be overwhelming. You set 100, don't know which to focus on, and end up sticking to none of them. It's like trying to catch 100 balls. You just don't know which to focus on. Well, Tiimo app can help with that. New Year's resolutions can be tricky, but beneficial for neurodivergent individuals, providing structure to your schedule and aiding in personal growth. Who wouldn't want that? However, executive functioning isn't always our friend, and the process of habit building comes with a unique set of challenges. The Tiimo app is a valuable tool for neurodivergent users, especially during this time of year, and it supports us on our journey towards being a better version of you in the following ways. Tackling task initiation anxiety. Tiimo's AI checklist breaks resolutions into small, actionable steps. For example, it can schedule actions like put on workout clothes, stretch for 5 minutes, or tell your dog he's a good boy, making tasks feel manageable. Emotional regulation. Setbacks can affect motivation. Tiimo's state of mind integration helps users reflect on their emotions over time, identify patterns, and make adjustments to align resolutions with their well-being. Time agnosia. If you're struggling to manage your time, then Tiimo's visual daily overview and focus timer make it easier to allocate time effectively, supporting consistency and punctuality in sticking to your resolutions. Lastly, Tiimo are turning over a new leaf of their own with their brand new feature that allows you to integrate with your Apple Health State of Mind feature. It allows users to track their mood alongside their planning and identify which tasks are draining their energy the most. For a discount, use code ADHD Chatter. The link will be in the bio. Now, while you're listening to the rest of the episode, I will be trying to clean up all of these balls without getting distracted. So enjoy and wish me luck. Jo, Rox, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. Thanks for having us, yeah.
Question for Jo. When I was first diagnosed, the psychologist said my ADHD was clear as hell, and she said she could tell I had ADHD before I even opened my mouth. So to throw you in the deep end to start with, do you think it is that obvious in either of us?
It's a trick question, I feel. It's really hard for me to answer that one because I know already information about you, I've seen you, and would know your stories. So I think that what I would imagine happened in that case was that when you were going in for your diagnosis, you weren't masking, hiding, you were probably feeling anxious. So it's probably evident to her in that setting that you were. So yeah, now I could give you examples perhaps of how it might be obvious, but I'd be always really quite cautious of saying something like that out of a setting. But yeah, there are some things that can be dead giveaways, but not necessarily in isolation. But I can see why one may say that if you're in that setting, because they'd be scanning for it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had the call, and at the end she said, Your report will come in a few weeks, but I can tell you now it's clear as hell, the ADHD.
Yeah. I think once the questions start coming and when you've had
Yeah.
that assessment, that is pretty much, we'll verify it and validate, but yeah.
What do you think are some of the telltale signs if someone has ADHD? And Rox, do you relate to what Jo says?
You go first, and I'll tell
you
you.
know, an annoying disclaimer, because some people do these things and they will not be neurodivergent or ADHD. But things like starting a conversation as if you've just been having it together out of the blue and you'll know what we're talking about is quite ADHD. I think for a lot of people, it's like, what's going on? People being very fidgety. If you sometimes observe someone on a train picking, fiddling, again, doesn't mean say they are, but they can be quite a sort of, agitation, kind of movement, constant, movement feature, I think, that a lot of people will exhibit and know they have if they're not masking and they're unguarded. The other thing will be the kind of organisation. So when you've got people that are just late or flustered sometimes, and it kind of seems to be a pattern, people that can fall into people pleasing, and you can come sometimes detect it and think, I wonder what's going on here. That might be a sign. Again, extreme empathy. Someone that really feels you and can relate deeply. That would not be an unusual one. And I think as well, the kind of sensitivity to other people's needs, not necessarily when they're turning up late or kind of, over-promising and under-delivering because they've stretched themselves, but it is that sense of not worrying about themselves, but really worrying about what everyone else, is everyone else okay? I get you anything, which isn't just people-pleasing, it's caring deeply.
Rox and I nodding along to everything.
Well, I'm
just
twiddling my
Are we
thumbs.
ticking the bingo?
Your fiddlestone. Just thinking. I mean, so much of that, I think, it's just great to hear it in such a clear, succinct way. I think we really need that. But the bits that really made me do this was turning up late and flustered. I was here 15 minutes earlier and I saw Jo outside. I couldn't believe it. So I'm here without Rich. I got here an hour early. Sat around the corner.
Really?
No,
you should have said.
No, because I was like, I've got to be on time without Rich.
Painfully relatable.
So I'm just always flustered. An example from this week, man, I'd gone to do a music video. So I'm filming a music video, acting like a rock star. I'm feeling on top of the world. Leave to go home. I've got all these bags, plan my journey, get on the bus. Half an hour later, wrong bus, other side of London. And I've got to get out. I'm crying, meltdown mode. So and I'm 40. Like it's never stopped. Constantly flustered. Bit of a negative side, but then the positive side, the sensitivity. Definitely within my family, I'm the most sensitive one, the one that's kind of seeing what everybody needs, holding us together, a bit of an emotional glue. And actually, as a job, as a singer, you have to be really emotional to connect with that thing. So I can actually. There's good bits, there's bad bits, and it all worked together. It's a lovely pie.
I can't get the visual of you stood outside in the cold for an hour waiting. I mean, that's
You're
so
now worrying
heartbreaking.
about that.
No, I went to the pub.
Yeah.
Oh, you went to...
I went and sat in a
good.
pub. I had a packet
good.
of crisps.
I thought you were like
I
around the corner outside in the freezing cold.
No.
Good.
I was there for 20 minutes, but then Jo came.
Good.
I was waiting till 6 on the dot, which is so... Why would I do that? But
But it's interesting, even just this interaction there, your deep concern, and I'm not saying that someone else wouldn't care, and that's definitely just ADHD. It's your personality as well, but actually, I can imagine, and you don't have to answer this, Alex, but that could probably stick with you. If you hadn't just clarified that and you said, no, I was in the pub, don't worry, you could probably go home and worry about the fact that side, because those things stay with us, and that would worry you, I think. So that's an example right there.
I'm an early. I'm always an hour and a half to the clock, an hour and a half before the guest's arrival time. I'm here.
Okay, good to know.
I get to the station because I come from Brighton. I get to the station half an hour before I'm always in the coffee shop in the station, half an hour before the train. The idea of being late is terrifying for me. So anxiety-inducing. And the effort that goes into sort of not encountering even the tiniest possibility of being late to something. But it's that extra energy we were briefly discussing.
Yeah.
I've spoken to 150 people on this podcast and thousands at events, and I personally think I've got quite a good radar of spotting ADHD in people. Obviously, I would never try and diagnose anyone, but I think I've got a good radar for it, and it's difficult to articulate. But there's like this energy, this essence of brilliance in them and what's the clear thing is they don't see that. They have moments, fleeting moments, where they do realize it. Their eyes light up, but then you can see it go quite quickly. And I'm so intentional about trying to compliment these people. But what I find is, and Ned Halliwell came on and he said this, and it made me really think about it, that the big compliments, because they don't believe them. When you say you're brilliant and you're amazing, what you just did is incredible, it bounces off them because it's such a contrast to the messaging, the narrative they've had their whole life.
Oof.
Do you think people with ADHD, Jo, struggle to accept and digest and take in compliments?
Yes, for sure. For exactly what you've just said there, Alex. And I think a lot of the time if I'm working with someone trying to build up the self-esteem and the kind of the evidence base of what's going on, it will be those smaller things. They're quite dull, perhaps, mundane pieces of evidence. Well, you did that project, you managed to do that. And even that will be dismissive. Well, yeah, but that's obvious. Anyone can do that. It's like, well, actually, no. But you need to build that up. And it's not something someone's used to if they've got ADHD. Because if you think about, you've talked a lot with different guests across these episodes, and anyone with ADHD will know the amount of negative messages someone receives across their lifespan. It kind of makes sense that you don't believe the compliment, let's say, or that was just a magic moment. It wasn't actually something I did. It was a fluke, or I did that well because I practiced for hours. As if that doesn't still make it good. Again, there's always a way to detract from it. And I think it does feel quite uncomfortable.
Oh, it
as well.
really is. It really is. I always feel, well, first of all, the thing about just growing up with the negative messages, you just believe you're a piece of shit. That's it. That's what I am. That's your identity. Always late, letting people down, the flake. And when that's internalized, it's very difficult to feel you're worthy of anything.
Yeah.
But when good things happen to me, my storytelling is that it's a fake. I faked it. I'll be uncovered. It's not real. It's a lot of imposter syndrome, and it's quite sad, really.
I meet people sometimes, and I don't know if you feel this, and they'll often be brilliant, but then they'll text me or email me the next day and say, I'm sorry for being weird, or I'm sorry for saying something. You can tell they're so anxious about the encounter. What's going on in that situation?
So much, I think. I've let you down. The rumination that undoubtedly has gone from point of, filming stopping to leaving and going, this, I should have done this, and was it good enough? The mental gymnastics going into that's probably just kind of common feature for that individual. It won't be just specific to this. It would be probably a feature that they have, but it's then kind of the compulsion to phone you and just check it was okay. Let me know I haven't let you down, that it's usable, that it wasn't rubbish, that I'm not weird or did a bad job. And in there, different people may have different motivations, but it's probably a real sort of desire to not have let you down and done a bad job and wasted your time, whilst also some reassurance, even though actually, even if you give reassurance, it may not land. You would say that. Kind of thing. So it probably doesn't soothe that part, but may soothe the fact that, well, at least you got what you needed and I haven't ruined it for you.
How do you take compliments, Rox? Because your career's going from strength to strength. You must be on the receiving end of so many positive comments now. How does that? Do they bounce off? Do they go in?
So I've had to work really hard. So historically, a couple of years ago, someone would say something nice, let's say about my music. Oh, no, I'm terrible. I can't sing. It's all, I'm just trying. I would degrade myself. You compliment me, I'll even the scale back with self-degradation. But I realised, and this was bleeding into everything. So for an example, couple of years ago, the first song I'd done that got to 1 million streams, I wanted to post it on my Instagram. So I posted, 1 million people have got terrible taste in music. And I thought that was really funny because I'm sort of laughing at myself. And actually, I sort of look back on that and think that's really sad. I couldn't even say, oh, I'm really happy. And I was really happy. But I almost feel like I'm not allowed to celebrate myself because I'm the letdown. People won't like me if I do that. So I need to apologise. So actually in 2022, I made a pact with myself, which was I wouldn't post anything on social media if it was degrading myself. So I basically stopped posting. Every story I went to do in the studio, writing another terrible, no, can't say that. And I stopped posting. And I forced myself to find another language, which is a little bit more clinical, a bit less of me in it. But actually, I can now do it. I can now say, I'm really happy. This sold out. Thank you. I'm proud. I found a way. So I think for me that the first thing was stopping constantly bullying myself. And now it's a little easier to hear kind things.
That's amazing. We were chatting off air, weren't we, about, you said people with ADHD, when they achieve something, they don't feel any sense of accomplishment, only a mild sense of relief that it's done. And it's that, like, not intentionally celebrating your achievements and therefore trying to build up an evidence base in your subconscious that you are capable, you are qualified, you are the right person to do it. So when the time comes to do that thing again, then that imposter syndrome has been disarmed. What do you think of that strategy, Jo, in terms of intentionally like celebrating wins? Is there a way someone can do that?
I think it's definitely something I encourage actively. It's not always easy to do. And there are different ways to do it. I mean, I love what you kind of have done and just described there, Rox, but I also really appreciate the challenges that has undoubtedly thrown up. But I think as well, you did something by noticing. And if you didn't notice that you were doing that in the first place, you can't then put the other bits in place. So I think that's quite a key element and not to be underestimated because it's quite hard to even see it. And I think that it's about absolutely stopping and acknowledging any bit of growth. Learning, even when things have gone wrong, how you showed up, how you handled it. You know, because I think a lot of people certainly will say to me, but a lot of people think, I'm not getting anywhere. Look at my life. I've got nothing really to show for it because it might be a mess at that time, according to them. They're there. They're showing up. A good outcome can sometimes happen because you didn't actually do anything. So that isn't the barometer. It's how you showed up. We can always learn something. We're not built to be perfect.
That's powerful.
You know.
Are we not? Can we relax now?
Stop fiddling.
I can be late and the world's not going to end.
No one's going
The world's not going to end.
to, stop talking to you because you're late. Nothing is going to happen. You may feel bad. It may have delayed something. There are some things that can't be undone, but being late certainly isn't one of them. But it's also how you handle that situation, isn't it? I think a lot of the time we don't realise, the impact of some of those very real effects of the imposter syndrome on how that processing can sometimes affect others. So one of the great things, not everyone has these sort of external commentary and validation and 1 million streams in that case. 1 million people can't be wrong. And that's not what you were thinking of at the time. You were feeling not worthy. But sometimes, you don't need that guilt trip in that moment, but actually that can then become really workable. Like you've got X number of views. Not everyone has to love everything you do, but all of those viewers or people that tune in or read what you're writing or listening to something you've done can't be wrong. So it almost kind of
It's funny.
diminishes them.
That is such a crazy and amazing way to view it. And it's just dawning on me. Me saying these people have terrible taste in music. I'm telling these people they've got bad taste in music. That seems horrible because it's almost quite selfish. It's self-degradation, it's self-obsession, rather than the humble position, which you have to be a bit confident to hold, which is
It's confident, yeah.
thank you so much. So actually that helps because the people pleaser in me is now like, right, I need to be nice if they've
that
listened.
helps rather than, again, I was very
it's
conscious
great.
that you would in the
It's
moment
great.
you may not have been able to hear
great.
that. But
Yeah.
if I'm working with a couple and one member of the partnership is going, but I'm not worth anything, why do you stay with me? All of that, which we can all experience in a relationship, whichever way our brain is wired. But actually, there's only so many times perhaps a partner can keep saying, I do love you and I like you because of these traits and I like you because of this. And if you constantly challenge that and refuse to believe it, it does start to, again, it's your pain and trauma and, lack of self-esteem that's really doing that. But actually, there comes a point when the partner goes, well, why can't you trust me to love you?
Mm-hmm.
You're calling me a liar. And actually that can be helpful when you kind of go, actually, well, I don't think he was a liar at all. So again, different things work for different people, but it is, you can logically go there with that. And it is, that's often quite healing.
There's been a huge discussion in the world of ADHD, but also here in the studio, as to the part trauma plays in ADHD. Some people think that it can actually cause ADHD. Rox, what part do you think it played in your upbringing?
So it's a tough question and one I've learned to be a lot more careful about because obviously, hello, impulsive. I'm just like, bruh, I think it was a part in my upbringing, all these reasons. My story is one of millions and I wouldn't say that I had trauma and it caused ADHD. What I definitely relate to is that I was a really sensitive kid in a non-sensitive household and that has left me with some really, really deep scars that I'm still working on today. I think the sense of personal badness, lack of self-worth, a lot of those things can be tied back to being seen as naughty, troublesome, messy, not trying. And perhaps, if there'd been more awareness back in the 80s, I wouldn't have dyed hair or all these tattoos and I might have a normal job. So it's ended up okay. But yeah, so that's where I kind of am today. What's the real answer?
I almost don't want to say anything. That was just so beautiful, actually, and kind of got me in the pit of my stomach, Rox, because I think that, as you said, it's a really tough question to answer, and people will have very strong views about this, and it's so individual. But certainly for me as a psychologist, I think trauma is a function of ADHD. To me, it's a neurodevelopmental aspect of, it's how we're wired, but there's a strong genetic component, as we know. And if you think about how someone turns up in the world, each brain will be different, but the environment that they show up in will be hugely influential in how they see themselves, how they feel about the world, what to trust, the coping mechanisms, and that can be very traumatic. Being in the world can be a traumatic experience on a daily basis, but particularly if you're neurodivergent and ADHD, the messaging, the kind of struggling to just get by, full stop, get it together. And then all the obviously incoming uninvited messages, left, right and centre. So that can be very traumatic. And I've certainly worked with adults, high functioning adults in that they're in a job, they're living their lives. It's not, there are many people that aren't able to do that and haven't had that. So that's what I mean when I talk about that. And there's been no obvious trauma as other people may have had. And yet they'll have traumatic experiences. So again, I think the definition of trauma is not static. And I think that how one person experiences it, and it's difficult to say that it definitely doesn't, I don't think, cause it, but it's in the mix. And trauma can happen alongside it. There's nothing to do, whether it's childhood illnesses, family situations, other stuff. So it's a complex interaction.
Can the traits of ADHD, which might come across as being a bit different to neurotypicals, which would result in those 20,000 more negative comments, right? So can that experience of receiving that many more negativity and micro corrections, can that cause trauma?
Yeah, I'd say so. People may not talk about it as trauma. They may not recognize it, but that physical reaction and triggering that can happen in situations is a trauma response. And again, I use that word very sort of cautiously because some people that I work with would definitely not feel comfortable necessarily talking in those terms, and it's very individual. There'll be also other people going, well, I've had real trauma and that doesn't really matter. So again, it's always with sort of an understanding that how that's defined, and I'd always use it cautiously, but absolutely repeat messages of not being good enough and the kind of racing to get somewhere, that feeling that you're going to ruin everything for, it's, and constantly checking, did I mess up? Have I upset you? That's constantly being in a state of hypervigilance, which is what happens when we're in traumatic situations and environments, and it's ongoing.
I remember about 6 months ago going to a new therapist. I was going to try a new modality to just go and dig a bit deeper into it all.
Get into it.
And my worst nightmare happened. I was on time, I'd planned it, and my train was cancelled. So obvious meltdown, off the train, finding another one. It's an hour-long session, and I arrived with 20 minutes to go. First session, first impression, and I just went into meltdown mode, and I just sat there and cried. I was like, I'm so sorry, I've ruined it. I understand if you don't want to see me. This poor bloke having kind of sit there and hold that. And it's this sense of you don't get to make mistakes because you do everything on purpose. So no one's going to trust you if you're late. So to me, I wasn't even late. It was a cancelled train, and I had screenshotted it to show him on train line. It was cancelled. It wasn't me. Now that led to a really interesting conversation about what it means for me to be late and let people down. But yeah, it can feel like the end of the world. Like he was going to say, no, thank you.
What was the outcome of that conversation? What came to light?
Well, that I realised I hold myself to an impossible standard of which I'm always going to fail. And actually there's a lot more flexibility in life from safe people. Like it's okay, he's not going to say he never wants to see me again. And actually I've been going 6 months and I've never been late once. I get 2 trains earlier now. I do what you do.
The whole day.
It's today. I was there today. You guys were talking earlier about what you've done today.
Yeah.
You've had a really busy day. All I did was get to therapy on time and get here. But that's fine.
That's not an all.
No,
in the context, but
for me, it's a win.
Yeah. It's very interesting because what you're saying there, Rox, I mean, I can totally empathise and relate, and it resonates with a lot of stuff that clients will share with me, and that again, that thinking that end of the world has happened because someone's late for their appointment. And I understand that, but that is that trauma response. For you, it wasn't a missing late train that was cancelled. Even if you'd missed it, you didn't miss it, it was cancelled. Someone else will go, oh, my train's cancelled. Because they haven't got those associations, and their survival in the psychological sense is not dependent on showing up in this beyond reproach way. Because that's what you're guarding against, isn't it, when you're kind of those standards.
Yeah.
And that's stuff that someone else is just not necessarily carrying. Thank goodness for them, because it is exhausting.
Thank goodness, it's exhausting. My partner, thank God, doesn't have ADHD, and he is such a sounding board. Yeah. I sort of watch him and like, is that what it's meant to be like? So if he's late, he just texts, sorry mate, 5 minutes late. And I'm like, is there any crippling guilt, anxiety? No, that's it.
Heart not racing.
So much more freedom and a trust that the other person will not be destroyed by our lateness.
Rox, you said a moment ago that you grew up in a household, you were very sensitive, but the other people in the household perhaps weren't sensitive. What did that look like? And I suppose, Jo, what is the long-term consequences if someone doesn't have feelings validated at a young age?
So it's quite strange because looking back, my mum, I do actually think my mum had ADHD, right? Because she was late all the time and she was very sensitive. She was very emotional and she used to overspend sometimes on credit cards, and her initials actually spell out late. So I think there you go. But she was very, very loving and very, very sensitive, whereas my dad was very withdrawn and had a lot of emotional difficulties. But as a kid, I actually idolised my dad. I idolised the one who I couldn't get. And I was actually quite rejecting of my mum's love. So actually, I could have had a sensitive childhood. I didn't know I was rejecting that at the time. I just wanted to please my dad. I wanted to perform. I wanted to win races. Probably why I'm a performer, obsessed with doing well now, I'm just realising. But there was no room for emotion, sadness, fear, anger. And in fact, when those emotions did come up when I was a teenager and there was a lot of affairs in my house and I was the one to discover them, obviously, the ADHD researcher, I was denied the ability to feel anger. And I shoved it all down. I silenced myself, and I've been silenced for so long, a seething bag of resentment and silence. And I'm just now at 40, 25 years later, starting to feel anger and rage. And it's really scary to allow it to come back into your body because it can feel like it can take over. But yeah, I'm quite sad for little me, because I think if I'd been able to choose and I'd idolised my mum a bit more, I would have had loads of cuddles and validation. But as a kid, I don't know, is that normal that you chase the one that you perhaps can't get?
I mean, what's normal?
That's true.
Everything's normal in that sense.
Yeah.
But I think that
Yeah.
what struck me as you were talking, Rox, and it could be that another child would do it the other way around and they try and kind of get into the emotionally dysregulated, perhaps, parent who may be more erratic and unpredictable, but more loving. But the way you've just described your dad there may have been something about the elusive nature of it, wanting that validation, but also withholding of it, consciously or otherwise, you not being able to read what good enough was. So, of course, trying harder. So I think that probably you can get locked into that. Any of us can. It's like, well, I'm going to try this now and try that. And it's almost like everything else can fall away. That's the thing that matters. That's why we can be in relationships, pursuing. Okay, it can be fun at first as well. And for the little spark of appreciation or love that inevitably would have happened in some ways, not that you can necessarily remember, but that would have been the reward that kept you coming back for more.
100%. It's also explained my love life for 20 years before Rich.
Yeah.
Chasing, yeah.
Why do you think you were so desperate to please your dad?
Oh. I think because he wasn't forthcoming with hugs or I love you, but I knew if I won a race or I got an A, I could crack maybe a nod and a smile. And that nod and smile was everything to me. So I really set myself up in, just a constant chase. But you never get there, because if someone can't hug their kid, that's not the kid's fault. I can say that and know that now as a stepmom, but honestly, deep inside my stomach, even when I say that, I'm like, there must have been something wrong with me. I must have been terrible, because who can't hug a kid? So it's conflicting. I have the rationality and the emotion. But even now, and I've been in therapy for years and years, I'm 6 years sober, I have years with this wonderful partner, I'm a stepmom, I have this awesome life. Even now, I'm like, wonder if Dad saw the book doing well. Wonder if Dad will see the album. I can't stop this narrative of maybe if I do something so great, he might care.
From your experience, Jo, why do you think a parent might deny or not validate or their child's ADHD?
There could be many different reasons. I think a lot of it may be ignorance, not knowing. Are we talking about if they knew their child had ADHD now, or
If the child goes, I've got ADHD,
I've got
and
ADHD,
it's just dismissed.
fear of judgment? And there's a lot of misconceptions being largely dispelled here, but not everyone's watching this. And of course, a lot of misunderstanding, lack of education, lack of awareness around ADHD. It's still got, as we know, negative connotations. It's like fearful. Nothing to do with me. So there could be all of that going on. There may also be paralysis, anxiety around, I don't know what to do with this. We acknowledge it. What does that mean? How can I support and help you? There may be a sense of kind of think I might have it. So it's potentially for some people that. There'll be other people I think that just don't acknowledge it exists, as we know. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Or get on with it. So there'll be different things for different people, I think. But I think underneath it all, it would be kind of ignorance, perhaps, and or fear, lack of understanding. And, and if people think it looks a certain way and you're not showing up in that way, it might be hard for someone to kind of get away kind of engaging with that or get into engaging with that. I think a lot of, we're talking about ADHD, but in my experience, a lot of trouble that people experience is about people not engaging with a lot of things.
Yeah, it's true.
So ADHD is one of those things. I'm heartbroken at the moment, and a parent not being able to maybe go for that. I'm not feeling physically well or mentally well, and a parent maybe not being able to manage that for fear, ignorance, not having known how to parent this because they've got no manual. So I think it's definitely specific for ADHD, but I think it's true for many other things as well.
What do you think it can do to a child, sort of in the long term, if that child has the perception that their parents don't take them seriously and don't make them feel heard?
Well, I think, again, it can be very destructive depending on the individual and how they soothe and manage that. And that can lead to a lot of self-destructive behaviours, which I think a lot of people don't even need the excuse for or the push to do. It will, for many people, reaffirm all of those negative beliefs as well. You're not good enough anyway, so of course your parents are going to just compound that, but in a very profound way. Because if you're lucky enough to have parents that do validate you and recognise you, that can often be the one safe relationship that can make the difference as you're growing up versus those that don't have that. And that's very sketchy and it's not universal. So yeah, it can have profound impacts, but certainly it could be leading you into all sorts of destructive things. On occasion, it will definitely also lead someone to be very resourceful. And if they're lucky and resilient and they meet the right people or in the right environments, they may find other people to do that for them and they can thrive that way. But they may not want to be around their parents or feel comfortable because they will always go back to that place of not feeling loved enough, seen.
How does that make you feel, Rox? Because I remember in our first interview, you mentioned that you got your ADHD diagnosis and you went to your father.
Yeah.
And I don't want to quote you, but essentially it wasn't immediately taken seriously.
No, it's really interesting. I can get really deep into my own emotion and feeling very sad and rejected. But I'm really listening to what you're saying and I can really understand it because my dad struggled with loads of things about me. Well, I was quite a difficult kid. I was a shoplifter. I didn't do very well at uni. I had loads of different partners. I then had a girlfriend. I've sort of just done all these different things. I've probably shocked him along the way. And he's never spoken to me about any of them. So it's not as my story. I've got ADHD and he hates me. It's not that. He can't speak about difficult things. And there's reasons. There's reasons for that in his past that I can understand when I'm in a more rational mode. I think what knocked me with ADHD, so my whole life I've been trying to get a hug and have him say, I love you and I'm proud of you. That's what it breaks down to. tried it with achievement as a kid, failed. I then tried it through self-destruction. So what you just said really rang true. I've had suicide attempts. I've been in the hospital. I've been a self-harmer. I've been an active alcoholic. Almost a sense, well, if I can't achieve my way into being loved, can I destruct my way? Can I scare you to care about me? And the answer was, unfortunately, no. I was in a hospital. He didn't speak to me about it when I was 23. So there's a pattern there. I think when I told, it was my dad and stepmom, I told them I had ADHD. Again, it was me trying. I believed I said I was barking up the wrong tree. And I really know that now. I've tried achievement, I've tried self-destruction. Now I'm going to try an official diagnosis. That's why my stepmom said, and this was the thing that just, I of course said nothing, but I did secretly seethe with anger. That's because you were coddled when you were younger, which was a reference to my mum being loving. And my mum isn't here anymore. And I just, if I could go back to that moment now, I'd stand up and go, get out of my house. Don't you speak about my mum like that. But in the moment, the people pleasing, the acquiescing took over. My shoulders just drooped and I sort of let her say it. It still plays in my mind years later. But the joyful thing is, I have the most wonderful partner. We have a little dog. I have 2 incredible stepkids. I have found a happy family. And actually through that, like, I know that I'm loved. So I have the odd moment, birthdays and Christmas, when I get quite sad. But on the whole, I don't know, I've just gone full throttle into the future. And although the past still, tears me apart, I try and put it in a song, try and make something of it, and kind of doing okay.
I mean, that when I heard you say that on that episode about, the fact that you coddle too much, it is hard. I mean, that sort of attitude is so harmful.
Well, it's almost saying it's still your fault. I really thought I had the trump card of
It's caused by too much love.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's really good to hear. I love that you're saying it, not me. I'm like,
well, it is. And again, this is, and I'm not, that's not judging
your
stepmother. It's the point is, we know, thankfully, in this setting and with our education and about what this is, it's not too much love, not too little love. Everything can make differences in good or bad ways, but it's that ignorance that suggests it's a thing.
Has your father acknowledged all of your recent success?
No, we haven't spoken for quite a while. I think as I was building this new family, the first time finding sort of happiness, really getting into sobriety, going into it in therapy, I started to feel really uncomfortable. We talk a lot about ADHD masking, but this is a different kind of masking, hiding 30 years of hurt in front of these 2 adults. And my ability to hold that mask up started to drop. I started to cry about my mum when I'd go home, and they hated it, made them very angry. And I started to realise that's not okay. I've just cried, and rather than hugging me, you got annoyed with me and then didn't speak to me for 3 months. So I took some time away from my relationship with him, which is brutal when it's been your hero and it's been the only one you've ever wanted to love you. And obviously my mum isn't here. So I think when you've lost one parent, it's very, very confusing, because my mum would do anything, right, to get back to see me. So it'll make me cry, sorry. Thought I might get through one, but I'm not. It's a happy reason. She'd do anything to come back from the dead, make a deal with God, whatever. She would do anything to get back for 5 minutes of my time. And I've thought about making those deals as well. Like, what about if I gave an arm? Could I just see her for 5 minutes in a dream tonight? My dad is an hour down the M25. And that is wildly confusing. The difference, how easily we have access to each other, how easily we could get on and have love. But at the moment, it's not my path. I've reached out a couple of times this year, sent a birthday card, sent a text. But it's it's really hard. And those have been met with, don't want to talk to you. You've caused too much problems. Not yet, won't meet you. Sorry.
Big stuff.
So yeah, it's hard. It's hard. But I always hold in the back of my mind, maybe he's watching. I have to, I think.
Well, I think your mum is going to be immensely proud. I said strength is an understatement. Are you okay, Rox?
Yes. Yeah.
Have you got any tissues?
No, I'm okay. It's fine.
Okay.
I'm just worried about my makeup.
I can go.
Yeah.
Immensely proud. You're an author. Work that you're doing in the space of ADHD to help so many millions of people. You're performing, selling out festivals on stage. It's unbelievable. And she would be so proud.
You'd dine out on that.
Thank
one.
you.
Yeah.
That means a lot.
It's clear that how important being creative is for you. What do you think you get from that process emotionally?
Yeah, so said obviously I was very sensitive in a house where I didn't feel I could be. Probably quite unhealthily. I split off those strong emotions into music and I made it into creativity, and I still do that. It is a splitting off of that which I don't feel I can handle or I don't know how to process. So the music I'm making now is a bit sort of more like rock music. I'm writing quite angry songs. There's anger coming out, and it's I talk about it quite a bit in therapy, this alter ego, a version of me that's able to carry anger and resentment and all of these emotions I've stripped myself of because I'm so desperate to be liked because of RSD. So music has been, my safe space to just put all the stuff I didn't think that I could be. And I know so many ADHDers, neurodivergents, have creativity. It doesn't have to be music. Everything that we're doing has a huge creative aspect to it. And it's such a saving grace for those kind of deep wells of our soul.
Absolutely. Do you think it is a higher concentration of creativity within the ADHD community?
It seems to be, and it's a hard one to measure because I don't think there's probably been, I don't know how you'd measure that. But what I think for me is something that's a real theme. Being creative as a neurodivergent, ADHD particularly, you have to be creative just to get by, to get round the neurotypical sort of world things. You have to approach problem solving in a way that maybe you're not being taught to, whether that's because thinking as well about the high rates of, if you're diagnosed with ADHD, you're much more likely to also have another coexisting diagnosis, whether it gets picked up and you receive it is another matter entirely. Dyscalculia, dyspraxia, dyslexia, autism, there's so many other things. So actually, you're going to have to approach all sorts of things in life differently, from getting dressed, ordering yourself, learning how to do a maths problem. So creativity is almost an intrinsic part of a neurodivergent person's experience. Certainly in a neurotypically designed world. It may be different if you live in different kind of parts of the world where there's different ways of learning, or in previous times when it wasn't so formulaic. So I think it's an intrinsic part, and I think it's a survival mechanism. And then I also think, because of the nature of the wiring and the diverse way of looking at the world, that lends itself to creativity. Which again, I think the two together kind of then just take you to places.
Creativity as a survival mechanism. Never thought of it like that before, but I think it's so true. With the hurdles we have to get over, and the creative solutions to these problems, we have to. We have to be creative. We have to see the patterns and analyze. It's in a defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. If someone has lost a sense or doesn't have a sense, others will compensate. And it's kind of how we work. So, that I think as well is that divergent thinking.
Yeah.
It will look different for each of us, but, even just how you manage your packing of the bag, the train scheduling, and there'll be all sorts of things that we do to kind of design out to a greater or lesser extent, depending how effective we are at that.
Yeah.
The stresses, the struggles, to pretend we can read something if we're dyslexic. You know, you might play the class clown or change the words a bit, but make it a joke. So no one really notices. And that's why people get through schooling sometimes without it being picked up, because we can be quite clever, creative at hiding struggles.
Yeah.
And I think that can be difficult, but it can also really lend itself to building resilience, and some of the best business ideas are solutions to things.
So interesting. I relate a lot to the creativity. I think it's that sort of internalized hyperactivity, that sort of 7 highly caffeinated squirrels barreling around. I had my first anxiety attack in a classroom when I was 6. I remember it so well. I ran out and asked someone to call an ambulance, and the paramedic reassured me that I was having my first anxiety attack because of that internalized hyperactivity. But when I was at home at the same age, I was creating board games and companies and being entrepreneurial at such a young age that I remember the hyperfocus and the creativity and the contrast between how I was presenting in an environment that I was comfortable in, i.e. my bedroom. My brain came alive. But when I was in a classroom, I was paralyzed with anxiety. That's why I do a lot of work now about neurodiversity in the workplace. So much productivity is lost, I think, to anxiety. What is happening in the... Because I think back of the creativity we've mentioned, the neuroscience in the brain when someone is hyper-focusing, using their imagination. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, apologies to all the neuroscientists out there who are official and would come up with a much more complex kind of detailed explanation. But in essence, what's happening is that state of hyperfocus is activating and recruiting key parts of our brain areas and, you know, the neurotransmitters that help us attend, focus, increase motivation, and calms us down. So it's this kind of beautiful cocktail, if you like, for an ADHD to go into, but it's only when it's traveled in the right area, because it sounds wonderful, and it is. It's a really unique experience for an ADHD to have. But it's not always pleasant, because it depends on what you're focusing on.
Yeah.
But it's this synchronicity in the brain, and actually the parts of an ADHD brain that are normally underactivated, so the prefrontal, the executive functioning areas, in a state of hyperfocus, become highly activated. And actually, the bit of our brain that would normally be about mind wandering, I'll go over here, I'll go there, it's like it's deactivated. So it's this potent interaction goes on, so you're locked in almost to the thing.
That is so amazing, because that explains something about me that my partner always laughs at, right? Which is, if we're really busy, he will book us a day off. Maybe we might go to an Airbnb, we might go to a spa. That's my favourite, right? And every time I'm in the spa for a day off, I'm coming up with another business idea. And he laughs and he's like, I've learned now that's what you do to relax. Yeah. I'm locked in, I'm happy, everything's fine. And also, my day off is planning more work. But that's why, because I'm locked in. I'm not daydreaming. I'm not procrastinating. No. And actually, I feel great.
Well, that's when that's a beautiful example of where the sort of positive hyperfocus, certainly, because you could just get locked into cleaning a cupboard, which might have a good outcome, but it might not necessarily feel rewarding. I could kind of, that kind of share stories. People do get locked into that, and again, it can be at the most inconvenient times. Like, actually, I was meant, if I had clients say to me, I can't open the cupboard doors if I'm meant to be at a meeting because I could just be late. Because again, you lose all sense of time, anything, things just fall away. It is, again, very hyper-focused. But it's when you're doing something creative, there's the reward that can become really kind of reinforcing and energizing. It's not just kind of, I'm in, it's I'm in and feeling great. And it's this, it's beautiful.
Why can we lose track of time during a hyperfocus? Because that hit me, that was very relatable.
Well, I think it's one of the features. It's the way that there's the bit that would normally mean that you wander is deactivated, switched off for that period. And it's why some people with hyperfocus will have to set alarms or do things to kind of, bring them back into the world.
Drink water.
Drink water, don't game for 10 hours or whatever it is that you can get locked into. But I think as well, there's that sense of you're just being lost. It's that synchronicity of the brain being in that state that time slips away. That's the question, wasn't it? Why do we lose sense of time?
Yeah.
I think it's just that it's like a flow state. It's not exactly a flow state, but that where sense of calm, we're locked. It just is. It's that interaction of those bits of the brain, and of course, our ability as an ADHD to regulate.
Right.
I mean that you don't kind of go, I now need to, that's what people often say.
Yeah, so relatable.
Yeah. So it's kind of the brain is, but also it's like, no, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
You described that. But why would you cut off from that? Providing it's not hurting anyone else, you don't need to either. But sometimes it can be hard to lock out because of that bit.
Do you
when to stop.
That hyperfocus can turn into an unhealthy obsession, and you must know some people that have made a career out of an unhealthy obsession. Because of that, can that be a reason why neurodivergence could go undetected for so long?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because sometimes it can be an unhealthy obsession, but actually sometimes it's just an obsession, and it depending on your environment and how much it serves you and the people around you will maybe be a defining feature of whether it's healthy or unhealthy. So if I'm meant to be going into an office every day, but I'm spending my whole day doing art, that's kind of an unhealthy obsession that's stopping me from functioning, and I'll lose my job probably. But if I am an artist and I'm doing that, the annoying thing is you can't switch it on when you want to. That's quite frustrating, as you as creative people will probably know. You can't go, it's 9 o'clock, I'm going to go into hyperfocus mode. And I think that's often the thing that's quite often misunderstood by certainly someone in a workplace, or when it's like, so produce. It doesn't quite work like that.
Wish it
Only
did.
it did. If only it did. So it's a bit more mercurial than that. And sometimes you'll know the conditions, you may be able to go to a spa, but there'll be better versions than others, and you won't necessarily know why you were more productive in that state. So, but even if you think about people that cook, like a lot of brilliant chefs, can't say all, they may not have a diagnosis, many will, that will be because they've been obsessed with something, and it will probably have gone back to something early in their life where it might have given them pleasure, it might have distracted them, they may genuinely have a curiosity, and they want to spend time with food and experiment, and it becomes their world. But you don't go, oh.
It's the unpredictability of it, isn't it? It's that you don't know when the hyperfocus is going to hit. No. I can have days where I will do absolutely nothing. I've got no productivity, no focus. Another day, I could do 4 months worth of work in a day.
Yeah.
Like it's just relentlessly positive in those experiences, but it's the unpredictability. How's hyperfocus influenced your life, Rox?
I mean, my job as a singer has been a lifelong obsession from a young age. I have tried and failed so many times, and most normal people would have quit. I've lost so much money in my 20s and my 30s, and I'm in my 40s, and I'm still doing it. Like, I'm relentless, because what it gives to me when I go into that state, when I write a song, it just feels so amazing. I love it so much. I've never stopped chasing it. And actually, strangely enough, the ADHD, the hyperfocus, the obsession is why it's working now, because I never did quit. A more sensible person would have. Well, thank God I'm not, because it's actually finally working. And there's a real lesson there in obsessions, resilience, growth, being on a bit of a different timescale. So for work, it's great. Where it's rubbish is when it just comes on random things, like a random new business idea that we don't have time to do, or wanting to understand a really weird psychological thing that might be going on with me that I'm absolutely not qualified to be researching, and spending hours down a research hole.
Cul-de-sac.
The cul-de-sac, and just knowing, it's like, I know where I'm going is going to lead me to a burnt out mess on this sofa, hungry, in need of water in 5 hours, but I can't not drive down it. And so it's, rough with the smooth, I guess.
It's easier said than done, 100%. When I get those moments where I'm like, new business idea, I try and not act on the impulse immediately. I try and just put it on this metaphorical idea shelf. And if it's still tugging at my interest 2 weeks later, then I buy the domain. Now that is so much easier said than done. 9 times out of 10, I don't follow that advice. But 1 time out of 10, I do.
There is an aspiration and work sometimes, yeah.
That's so funny. Every month, maybe 300 quid, 200 quid comes out of my account. And Rich is like, what are you spending on 123veg.com? I'm like, they're my domains. You can't. He's like, you can't be spending that. I'm like, don't touch them. I might need them.
How big's your graveyard domains?
I think I've got 25.
Yeah, that's impressive.
What have you got?
Probably about the same. My first podcast was called Walk Away Wiser. I spent about 10 grand worth of equipment. I turned my bedroom into a studio in Brighton. When the postman delivered it all, I didn't want to do it anymore.
You were over it.
It was going to be a business podcast to go up against the big one.
Wisely.
Yeah.
Here you are. So you take your own advice.
Yeah.
I think the difference with this is I think if I was honest with myself, business content wasn't connected to my intrinsic motivations and passions. And I think that's so important to work on that self-awareness, really reflect on the day and ask what happened today that made you sad, what happened today that made you happy. Yeah. So when a new idea does come into your now and you get so excited about it, you can see if it's aligned with your intrinsic motivations. Because when that happens, which is what ADHD chatter is, because I'm genuinely passionate about raising awareness on the subject, that's when we don't abandon the idea. Yeah. And I think that's just a little bite-sized bit of advice, like work on the self-awareness. So when an impulse, an idea does come to you, a new idea, a new friend, a new job, a new partner, really pause and reflect on whether that thing, that item, is a good fit for you, and if it does connect to the results of your self-awareness exercises.
It's so true. It's that magpie effect. Is it just a piece of glittery foil, or has it got more substance? And you're always going to be attracted by it, but you don't have to go fly after the wall.
I remember the shame looking at all these Amazon boxes of cameras, and I'd turned my bedroom into a soundproof studio. I'd stayed up all night, soundproof foam all over the walls, dismantled my bed. My partner was like, what the hell? Yeah. 3 nights ago, this was your new life purpose. Yeah. Now you're not. It's bizarre.
So, but what a wonderful way! Yeah. It couldn't be more on brand for getting to ADHD chatter, sacking off another idea completely, being filled with shame, and then striking gold. That's just how it goes. Something else interesting that I've learned is that I get almost more enjoyment out of planning and fantasy than I do doing the actual work. So Rich has learnt with me, because I'm always dropping
your dopamine.
The fantasy, the planning, the doing the logo, coming up with the name. That can be done without taking the next step. So Rich calls it, he always used to be like, oh no, we can't start another business idea. And now he's learnt, and he goes, I'm going to jump in the fantasy with you. We probably aren't doing this. And I'm like, cool. How can we, genderless boxes, what could it look like? What could it be called? And he'll just jump in and I show logos and names. It's a game. It's like a playing entrepreneur board game, and then it's done.
Amazing.
But it's the creative juices that you're giving, space to there. And actually, in my experience working with people and hearing conversations, as we're doing our work, and you'll be able to connect dots across their history that they may not be able to. But I think even the walk away wiser, yes, it was ADHD. And on the surface, we can just go, yeah, get it. But actually, by going to those lengths, you were doing something along the lines of where you were going to end up. But also you were like, that idea doesn't resonate in the way I need it to stay interested. It's like that connecting the dots, looking back. There are dots. They may be haphazard ones, and they may not be a way someone else might go about it, but they wouldn't end up here.
So actually, maybe it's so funny. You describe it as, I filled with shame, let myself down. Could it be really good intuition that it wasn't the right idea? How funny we always describe it in negative terms, where actually...
There's it's not that it wasn't exhausting, disappointing, costly, but actually I do think you probably learned so much by going to those lengths. I don't know.
I think at that
would be my
stage of my
guess.
life, I had a bit of an identity issue because I had this mask on that thought I was a businessman because of the Lad Bible stuff and the social media companies pre-ADHD awareness and the talks I was doing on stage and wearing suits and going to business dinners. I thought I was a business person. So the business podcast made sense and I acted on the impulse based off that mask. And actually, when it came down to actually booking the guests and talking about business on a podcast, I wasn't interested. So I quit.
Thank goodness, because again, your heart wasn't in it.
Yeah.
But actually, the logical thing you did follow. It wasn't a completely random bonkers idea.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the right one for you. And so I think, I'm convinced there's more in that than an impulse.
So cool to hear.
You might have just got there quicker because of the impulse. Some people would spend years noodling over that, thinking, I'm going to have a business. Because again, that would fit with your profile and your history. But I think that some people would, and they wouldn't test it.
The guy I hired to be the producer, I told him, and he said, so when did you get your ADHD diagnosis? He knew before I did.
There were signs.
Yeah.
There were signs.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always signs.
Yeah.
I've heard a few people say their ADHD was misdiagnosed as bipolar due to their peaks and troughs of hyperfocus and the following burnout. What other disorders or diagnoses might mirror invisible symptoms of ADHD? And Rox, do you relate to any of those?
Well, I have got no idea, so I'm absolutely going to defer to Jo. The only thing I do know is I can't be an official diagnosis because it's not in the DSM, but I was diagnosed in a loose way with CPTSD first, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is linked to my mum's death and the aftermath of that. And actually, so much of my ADHD was almost masked by trauma symptoms that actually I was in therapy for 2 years before ADHD came into the conversation because I was dealing with a lot of nervous system stuff, a lot of flashbacks and things like that. So actually I was kind of masking it, and then I'd got loads better. And then I bought in, I've gone on the train the wrong way 5 times this week. Is that normal? So I had to clear some weeds to get through. But over to you, Jo.
Well, I think you've described what a lot of people's experience will be, not necessarily the same diagnosis, but again, it's that being, the bipolar thing definitely because of that burnout feature and the manic phase, which can look very ADHD. Think of the studio example you just provided, but actually anxiety-based disorders are often first diagnosed. OCD, generalized anxiety, social anxiety. So that's a very common misdiagnosis, and will be treated first. And it's then it might be apparent that as that gets better, it's coming from ADHD, or maybe that the ADHD bit is never picked up, depending on who you're working with. There would also be, I've certainly had people as well that I've worked with that have had thyroid, investigations. So from a medical perspective, because again, the exhaustion. So there would be that, rather than thinking of ADHD, particularly depression. Depression can mask the anxiety, which can come from the ADHD. Also, sleeping disorders. Some people show up with insomnia, be treated for that, but actually that can be, ADHD or linked with ADHD and the symptoms. And yes, there's probably, I think that'd probably be the main. Addictions, obviously, would be. That might be how someone presents. Get treated for an addiction, maybe get sober, clear that up.
Tick.
And then ADHD is still there, and actually you realise that you're feeling more chaotic, but differently, and not better, but different, and your mind is more active when you're not self-medicating. Or you start self-medicating with things that are not the thing you're giving up. It might be that you're shopping, sex, something else replaces sugar, other things. So often when people have stripped away all of those things, they'll go, oh, hang on. Thankfully nowadays people might just go to the ADHD possibility before working, doing years of therapy or AA. That might still also be needed. But
Interesting. I first heard ADHD in an AA meeting. That was years ago.
Did you?
Yeah. I didn't think anything of it, but that was the first. I reflect back now and I was like, bloody hell, I heard those 4 letters all the time in AA meetings.
Yeah.
How does anxiety sort of manifest in your life?
So I don't get that anxious anymore, which seems like a wild thing to say. I don't think it's because I'm not an anxious person anymore, because I am. And if I'm out in the wild, actually today's been lovely and I haven't been. If I'm meeting new people, going to a new place, I'm incredibly anxious that I'm going to get lost or that I'm going to lose my phone, just like the silly little things that can sort of ruin my day. But I have a life where I work from home a lot and I have this wonderful partner. So I'm sort of like quite anxiety insulated. I think the difference now when I do feel anxiety, let's say I'm on a train and I've missed my stop or I'm worrying I'm going to miss my stop. Whereas before it would like totally derail me and I wouldn't understand, I wouldn't be reflecting on what was happening. I can now go, okay, we're really anxious about missing the stop. Let's check Google Maps. It's ADHD. Yeah. We're going to trust our memory. If we're really freaking out, we're going to call Rich. There's like a slightly more sensible adult that pops up in the back that can watch my anxious self. And that's quite nice to have.
Are there any situations that you're aware of that would cause you to sort of mask up and sort of change who you are a bit?
Yes, I think everywhere I go all the time. It's just something you said earlier, and I think it is so important. Actually, I think you were eating an orange, and Alex said it was about, it isn't just one mask that comes up and down. We have different segments, we have different masks. So on the internet, I have a bit of a mask that I kind of am laughy and jokey and jovial. And then at home with Rich, I can be like crying and a depressed blob, and people don't see that. And when I go on tour, I have to become a rock star. Really can't be neurotypical. Tried for decades. Can be a rock star. How cool is that? So yeah, different masks come up and down all the time. But the one mask I will never, ever, ever wear again is that I'm organised, I'll always remember, I'll always get back to you. I used to try and present as a highly organised person, as a defence against my greatest shame, and I don't do that. I let people know I'm a bit of a messy motherfucker, I might be a bit late, I might forget an email, but I'm bang on it, I'm right here with you. And that's a really cool one not to wear anymore.
Yeah, it's inspiring.
Such a relief, I imagine. And it's that self-awareness, and even you were talking there, Rox, it's, you've got so many things you're doing to manage that for you, it's, I don't know if you give yourself credit for it, but you've identified the things that cause stress, you designing them where possible out, you're sober, all those things, as well as living in the world that you're in with a loving relationship, feeling good enough, all of that. Of course, you're in therapy, you're doing so many things. It's really kind of, brave stuff that is difficult to do. But that is that management of anxiety, it's
nice.
not easy.
Breathe and receive.
Take it in.
Breathe and receive.
That's one of those compliments. It's find a trickle point. Yeah.
Thank you.
But I think there's a lot of things, and I think that it's really helpful for us to kind of point that out, A, for you just to hear it, but actually for anyone else listening, because I think it can feel that it is so tough, and it won't be things that you personally can do. If you're at home watching, you can, but it takes time. It takes a lot of different things, but I think it's really hopeful. Because certainly I've worked with people with their anxiety, and it can feel so impossible that you'll ever get to grips with it. And obviously get to grips with it does not mean not experiencing it. It's degrees and not being governed by it.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah. Masking, I mean, it's a topic that comes up so much on this podcast. I think it features in every episode, I think. What is the toll, Jo, of someone masking for years and years?
It's a really hard one to answer and articulate, and I think it would be different inevitably for everyone. The extent to which they've had to mask or to switch masks. But I think the honest answer is a lot of people don't even know they're masking. It's so fundamental to their existence. And I think that you've probably spoken to lots of people on this episode and just in general because of the conversations you'd be having. And people say, I only realised I was masking after a diagnosis or in a different situation where maybe I didn't know what to do. So I think that's why it's also hard to answer, because it's like, well, it's not something we kind of pick up and put on typically. It's intrinsically linked to how we feel like we need to show up in the world. Whether that's just standing still in a line and trying not to fidget from a young age, because in case you're going to, disrupt people, listening, sitting still, not getting up and walking around a classroom. There's so many times when we have to go, have to be a particular way to fit in.
Yeah.
Just a society, even if you don't want to fit in, teachers will make you, for good reason, by the way. But, so I think but it's exhausting. I don't think people realise how exhausting it is until they allow themselves to stop or to reduce. And I've said this before, but it's again hard to measure, but everyone masks to an extent. Getting up and getting dressed, brushing your hair, it's showing up in some kind of way. You might not want to do that. And a lot of people go, when I get home, I take my clothes off, just get in my scruffs, I sit like a slob. And I think that's kind of universal. Yeah. How you do it will be very unique to you. But obviously, if you are experiencing executive function challenges like an ADHD, there's more masking required to be presentable.
I think the worst situation for me is when you feel your social battery just go. And that's fine if you know where the exit is and you can leave. But if you're stuck at a dinner table, I had this conversation with Ellie Middleton, particularly if it's a group of new people, and say you get to the dessert course and your social battery just goes, but you're stuck at the dinner table because it's rude to leave. I think it's rude to leave based on what I've been told. And then you just get so paranoid because the version of you that's now gone almost non-verbal is noticeably weird. That's the most anxious situation for me.
Yeah.
Do you find you do that, Rox, sometimes?
100%. And it's horrible. Like, where have I gone?
Yeah.
Quick, trying to find it. I've learned, a historical, massive people pleaser, I'd be the last to leave. Because you never want to upset anyone. But then Rich is the total opposite. Like Rich, literally, we go to see his family we haven't seen in months. Go round, barbecue. It's been an hour, guys. I'm tired now. I'm going.
Freedom.
And when we were first together, I was like, you can't. That's so rude. And actually, I've learned that is so okay and so cool because he shows up for that hour, he's chatty, talks to everyone, has a cuddle, and he's like, I'm tired now. Let's go.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to have a bit of that energy. I wouldn't be quite as blunt, but I would say to someone now, I'm really sorry, I'm going to skip dessert. I need to get home. I've been out twice in the last 2 weeks, which is wild for me, at a couple of concerts at the O2. And I've left early because I don't want to leave in the rush. I want to get home. And people have given me the tickets for free. So historical me, I've sat there, but just got, I'd like to leave now. It's a little bit loud. Have a great night. So you just learn that people aren't going to hate you for looking after yourself.
You just reminded me actually of, and we'll cut this if you don't want it to be included. But I remember the last time you guys came in with Rich, and Rich came in very chatty. We did the interview, brilliant interview. And I walked you guys down the stairs after the interview. And I remember Rich said, right, we're going.
Did he?
And I thought, I respect that so much. Because you could tell, I see it. I saw the social battery go.
We would have been chatting, right, going on. And he would have just, it would have gone. Yeah. I was like, come on, we're off now.
Yeah.
Just brilliant. There's something to be learnt from the other side.
Jo, where do you think the natural masking of a person to fit in ends, and masking to such an extent it's exhausting and perhaps should be addressed begins?
Oof. Well, I think when the very needing to be addressed bit is the bit that I'm going to, kind of think is the key bit of that question, if I'm hearing it right. And it's when it's becoming too burdensome to do that. There are things that can be relatively easy and within our scope. But if you're in an environment or in a relationship where it is tough to maintain that, it's going really far away from your core self and what you feel is manageable and doable and sustainable, that is when real anxiety starts to kick in, burnout, sort of the almost paranoid thinking of, I'm showing up differently, and the mental toll of that means that you can't function in those scenarios. And rather than carrying on masking, that's a sign, hopefully before you get to that point, but they're definitely situations where you need to start addressing it. It's almost like being too or many people.
Have you ever known someone to be, say, maybe in a career or even maybe even a marriage, and they've just had a moment where they've looked at themselves and gone, this isn't me at all? And it's really, their situation is a consequence of years and years of masking, and they've just had that moment of realization.
I think there's probably many moments of insight along a career or a relationship that might accumulate, that have been pushed away, ignored. In a professional setting, what I will often find is that it might be when someone goes into a different role, that either the scope is broader, and maybe that can be overwhelming, and all of a sudden it's like, well, I like those bits, but I haven't really worked out why. But now I'm in this. This is a struggle. So that can be not necessarily all of a sudden, but it'd be like, I'll often see people like that again. I can't do it. I've been found out. That might be how it is. Or really burning out, or they're coming in with something else, like extreme anxiety, or, and it's actually, no, this environment's just not working for you for whatever reason. Or it becomes less interesting because it's either becomes so narrow or bigger, or working with different people, or in a different location, different projects. So all of those things can maybe seem like all of a sudden now, but actually if you look at the features of what's going on, it's just that, you're not going to enjoy that or be energized by it, but that can go on for quite a while, and then it just may be a point. In relationships, I think it's much more along the way. There's a trying to make it work that happens, but it's not like they haven't been noticed, those things, but you kind of compensate. It must be me. And one day you might got to go, I'm done. That could come with a diagnosis. That I realise I've been trying to make this work. Sometimes it can come with self-esteem growing. Sometimes it can end because it's got so chaotic. Like if you think about an ADHD and things that may, you might choose consciously or unconsciously, someone very calm, safe, because that's what you're craving. And again, you don't necessarily do it thinking it's going to fix you, but there could be that wake up years down the line, and that could work, but you may just not be compatible in any other way. You may be bored rigid. No fault of the other person. Equally, you might be attracted to the stimulation and the excitement and the wildness. That can get tired and can get dangerous. And as you mature and grow and work on yourself, that is not a relationship that's going to work. It may feel all of a sudden, but it often isn't.
You've been in any situations, Rox, where you've had that moment of, this isn't me?
Oh yeah, loads. And my whole life, in my 20s, loads of jobs in admin. The ultimate masking, because I couldn't accept I was bad at admin, so I would take on a really difficult admin job, like in an investment bank, and like burn myself out to prove I could do it. And one time I just didn't come back in the next day. I literally walked out and didn't come back in.
Yeah, amazing.
I didn't know what was happening, but the most recent time I did it, it's about a few years ago now. After I got sober, I was working as a songwriter, and I was doing quite well. I'd written a couple of hit records, written 1,000 songs that weren't hit records, but within there was a few hit records, and I was on this really awesome path to being quite a big, successful songwriter, and that's what I thought I wanted. And then this little sort of desire was like, what if you tried to be a singer again? What if you tried the artist thing? I was like, nope, I'm a songwriter. I've got these hits. I'm now signed to a publishing deal. I write 4 songs a week. So I ignored my impulse. I ignored my intuition, and I kept forcing myself to get up and go to songwriting sessions. And it got heavier and heavier and heavier. And actually, eventually, my body went into burnout. I had to take 2 weeks off And during that 2 weeks, I realised I want to try music one more time. This is my last chance. And I moved away, and actually I upset a lot of people that had invested in me as a songwriter. All my friends were songwriters. My identity was as a songwriter, and I walked away from it. But I think you have to listen. You can't forcing yourself to do what other people want and what is expected over the long term. That's where burnout comes from, and it's brutal.
And it's logical to someone else.
Yeah,
and
it's logical to everyone else.
Yeah.
And when that burnout happened, because of that excessive masking, was it a shock? Did you feel, were there early signs of that burnout?
Yeah, but I was refusing to listen to myself or my body. Like, you do not get a choice. We are finally making something of ourselves. We're coming good. Don't you dare mess it up with another impulsive plan. So I'm going to march you in every day, 10 a.m., and we're going to write a song. And I truly believed I had the power to push through, and I was getting ill. I had 2 frozen shoulders. I had backache. I was going to doctors. I was doing blood tests.
All showing up in your body.
All showing up in my body until eventually it was so bad. I had to stop. So the signs were there, but again, it's the low self-esteem. I didn't think I deserved a change of direction. I didn't think I deserved to follow my dream. I should be happy with where I am. But actually, quite happy that I made
Thank
the
goodness. It's pretty extreme, but again, not an unusual one. And I think as well, you're describing something there, Rox. I think as an ADHD, you've always thrown yourself at stuff as, try harder. Again, it's that creativity. You do go harder, faster. You don't give up. Sometimes you're good or bad, And actually, sometimes it can be hard to judge what is a folly and a giving in and an impulse versus what is really going to make me ill.
Yeah.
And that is genuine as we get older and you've got responsibilities and you actually are doing something that's kind of adjacent to what you want to be doing. Why wouldn't that make you happy? It must be you in a funk. Get on with it.
Yeah.
Get over yourself. But actually,
absolutely.
When it starts moving into your body, that's when you kind of go, no, it's telling me something. Hopefully not that long. But, it's not as simple, I think, as just the self-esteem. That's definitely the core.
Yeah.
But it's understanding yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to talk more about RSD, but first I want to do something you're both probably very familiar with now, being on the podcast a couple of times, the ADHD Agony aunt section, which is called the washing machine of woes, because I always forget my laundry in the bloody machine.
Yeah, same.
But I am using the Tiimo app now, which I'm getting a bit better. Every week I ask my Instagram community for their biggest ADHD woes, and it goes in the washing machine, and I pick one and read it out, see if there's some wisdom. Right, this week somebody has said, I keep begging my husband to see a therapist because he has some unresolved issues from childhood, but he dismisses it and says, therapists are all mad themselves. Do you think this is true? And if so, maybe it's a good thing?
Wow. I always remember the first patient when I was training ever working with actually came in and that was his opening gambit. And he said, I don't want to see another psychologist or therapist or psychiatrist because you're all mad. So it's a theme, it's out there. So, I think what I'm hearing, and I'd like to say, no, therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists are not all mad, but human. So there will always be perhaps, people in there that maybe not very well. Hopefully that's not the case but it's like any other job. But what I think I'm hearing here is he's not ready. There's too many defense mechanisms up. And that might not be what the asker wants to hear, but that's what I'm hearing in my experience, that it's not going to work until he feels it'd be safe for him to do so, or he feels he would want to go.
Yeah, interesting. Whoa, this week.
Yeah.
Have you ever had any mad therapists, Rox?
We're all mad, aren't we? So, but just on that, it's not a partner, because Rich did go to therapy quite early on, but I have it with my eldest stepkid, they live with us, they're 20 years old, and for 5 years, I've been kind of politely suggesting there might be some stuff a therapist could help with. And it's always been met with resistance, or nah, I'm not into that, cringe. They're 20, obviously. And what I've realised, or what me and Rich have realised, is rather than trying to control them, which we cannot, they will have to choose it themselves if it's going to work. We can control us. We've both been to therapy. I'm still in therapy, so we're role modelling it. So I'm not saying this lady has to go to therapy to role model to an adult, but is there something in her life that she might want to look at? She's messaging here, so there might be topics she wants to discuss. Role model it, do it yourself, and rather than trying to control others, just control yourself and see what might happen.
Rox, can you explain the visceral feeling of RSD you might experience or have experienced recently? And Jo, could you walk Rox through why she felt that way and how she might have been able to manage it?
Okay, so I'll pick one that happened recently. It happens a lot, as we know, pretty constant with work, with friendships, with family. But one that happened recently that really knocked me was two of my really good friends that I work with a lot. We've actually just finished an album. My album comes out in January. They've produced it. So we've spent all this time together. We get on super well. They call me their friend. We text each other. Dom and Sean, if you're listening. I think Sean might listen to this podcast. And one day I'm in session with them, and it just dawns on me that I don't think that they actually like me. And I've known them for 5 years. We've done so much work together. Like we have such a laugh. I don't think they actually like me. I don't think they want me here. And a sense of I need to say something funny. I need to write a good line in a song because that's the only reason I'm here. And I felt like so desperate, that desperation to win their affection, even though it never went away. And I went home and I said to Rich, I've just got it in my head that Dom and Sean don't really like me and they won't want to work with me again. And what was so brutal was there was no logic about it whatsoever. I was in the middle of having like the best day. We've done this album. We're all best mates. And then bang, you're going to lose it now because they don't actually like you. And that narrative just like played over in my head for a long time. And it took me actually a little while to go and get back in. We're now fine and it's gone back to normal. And in fact, nothing happened. But because I know it's RSD, I got to talk it out with Rich. I got to have validation from him that there was no evidence it wasn't real, that it's kingdoms, they love you. If I hadn't known it was RSD, I might have cut off that friendship. And in my past, that's what I've done. The amount of friends I haven't gone back to, or I've cut off, or even romantic partners, because I've decided they don't want me anymore. That thing you said earlier about if people give you a compliment and you have to sort of trust them, it's really making me think about RSD as well, because in that moment, it's like RSD is all about me. Yeah. They're judging me, my world. It's really not kind of understanding and like mentalizing two other humans, two whole stories. There could be all this other stuff going on. So we can become so insular and like 100% convinced we are being rejected when a million other things could be going on.
Well, let's assume a million other things definitely are going on.
Yeah, there you go. They
Full
are.
stop.
They are.
How that's playing out in the room, none of us know.
I think what's wild is when it's something where there's something logical, something that's a bit nerve-wracking, or perhaps there is a little bit of feedback that's hit me like a knife in the tummy, that can make sense. But when it is that intrusive thought, and I know a lot of the people that follow us have it in their relationships, in their safest relationships, convinced that they're disliked or hated or a burden. In fact, sometimes I ask Rich that, are you mad at me? I ask him all the time. And that's when it's really sad, because it's then kind of impacting your safe space, the one place where you shouldn't feel that you're ever going to be rejected.
We did a fantastic episode on RSD recently, where I shared the story of making pancakes for my partner. We've been together for 5 years, and I wanted to make her pancakes. I was in a brilliant mood, so excited to show her my pancake making ability. And she said, "You're putting the ingredients in the wrong order." And it was instant shutdown, visceral, physiological pain. And in that moment, I remember wanting to end the relationship, like to impulsively say, "It's over." It's the madness of it.
Yeah.
And now I can look back at that and other situations through the lens of that's RSD. You can be so much kinder to yourself and recognize that a simple strategy like putting a pause in between the trigger and the response, I think, is so give yourself time to pause and to remove yourself if you can, and then come back. And because, you didn't mean anything by it.
No, she stepped on a landmine.
Landmine, a pancake landmine.
You didn't expect it. Yeah, so you were surprised. And it's that when that RSD response happens and there's nothing to point to of note, it's disproportionate. I mean, it's always going to be disproportionate by its very nature, but, particularly disproportionate, like the other day, when you couldn't see what had happened. It's the fact that it's there. It's about showing yourself compassion in that moment and going, this is my reality right now. It's activated a pain that's super deep and real. You're not wanting to be feeling like that. And then you can do the working out after. Because I think it's that shame and that, it's as if, you can logically answer it, but you just are.
Because RSD, you have the trigger moment, pancake comment, but then you go into shut down, the shoulders slump, you want to leave the relationship, then you get the self-disgust at yourself for that. So you double hit yourself with it, whereas actually noticing RSD trigger, whatever that safe word is for your relationship, so they know. But that can be so hard in the moment because you can feel, I feel like a stupid baby. I'm like, why am I feeling like this?
Yeah, it's the logical question, isn't it?
Well, the logic is it's almost just gone. But yeah, trying to pause.
She can spot it when I'm triggered so quickly. And speaking to people in the community, I feel like you can see a trigger in someone, even when they think that they're doing really well at hiding it. Because I've been triggered sometimes, and I feel like, okay, I'm really shameful about why that's triggered me. I'm going to keep it inside. I don't want anyone to know that internalized I'm raging or welling up. But she'll see it, and she'll go, I didn't mean anything by that. Do you think that is? Do you think people are not as good as hiding their triggers as they might think they are?
I think some people aren't great poker players, so it's there, and you can feel it in the room, even though it might not look like it. I think that in the case of, what you're describing with your partner, she sees you. She knows you. So I don't know if she'd have seen that in the first, say, 3 months or before you revealed yourself to her. But I think that it's a sign of the love, actually. And I think some ADHDs will see it in other ADHDs because, again, you're highly attuned to the environment, that deep empathy and recognition, even if you didn't have the label for it before. So, again, it's not a nice, neat answer, I don't think. I think sometimes we can feel it. And sometimes the kind of shift a coping strategy will be, I'm going to get angry or defensive or make a joke. We may not see that as a coping strategy, but something will be happening. So not everyone will pick up on it, though.
Yeah. I also had a really interesting conversation with Dr. Mark Rackley on here about narcissism and how some things can overlap there with ADHD. Do you think there's a relationship between narcissism and ADHD, and can those behaviours be confused?
So, first of all, it's important, they're very distinct diagnoses. For the ADHD out there, they are different. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, which we don't like the word, but, is that, whereas narcissistic personality is a personality disorder. So, and we're not talking about narcissistic kind of traits and behaviours here, if I'm making that distinction. But if we're looking at the overlap and maybe the misunderstanding and what is what, there can be some behaviours that can appear. And you could also be ADHD and narcissistic. So it's not like you can have one and not the other. So I just think they are distinct, but it doesn't mean say that someone couldn't be both. But I think that things like emotional dysregulation, if a narcissist is feeling exposed and vulnerable, they may be very angry and explosive. That could also be very much a feature of someone's ADHD. The sort of stimulation and the sort of thrill seeking, the dopamine dysregulation aspect definitely overlap. Again, sources may be similar, but how that operates would be different, but it could look similar. The being in your head, thinking it's about you, but that will again be for different reasons and sources. So I think there's definitely some overlap, but I think as well, the distinctions that I think are really important to make are that someone who's got narcissistic personality disorder, if they're having challenging relationships or challenges with relationships, so can someone with ADHD. But the way that plays out will be very different. Someone with ADHD, their challenges in relationships will typically be because of their executive function challenges. They'll be late. They may let you down. They may be really unreliable. They may cut your sentences off, talk about themselves. That is coming from the challenges and is most of the time, if not all the time, it's super well-intentioned, but it can cause havoc in relationships. Someone narcissistic, on the other hand, is not going to be doing it in that way. They will be having challenges in their relationships because they'll be manipulating, being strategic in how they make you feel bad about yourself. So they'll let you down deliberately to keep you on your toes, to retain control. And that is where it's a very important distinction. Empathy. People with ADHD typically will have oodles of empathy.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I can sort of see how they could be confused. You could confuse narcissistic rage for an RSD flare or love bombing with the hyperfocus of an early stage in a relationship. I think. Do you think it's more like a narcissistic person, and correct me if I'm wrong, they might alter who they are and change who they are in order to manipulate and get what they want, but an ADHD person will alter who they are and put on a mask because they hate themselves. It's the intention.
And to not be rejected. And actually, if, where there may be some narcissistic, again, overcompensation, behaviours that it could be from someone ADHD who's got such a deep wound and fear of being rejected that actually some of those behaviours are a protective mechanism. So again, it's not that they may not be there, but I think for different reasons.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've really changed my view on narcissism as a concept because obviously it's been so pop cultured. And I think we all love to say, my ex was a narcissist. They're probably saying the same thing. But I feel like I have been in relationships, friendships with people that certainly act in ways that may align. I don't know, not here to diagnose anybody. However, I've also thought about myself, and I like being on stage, and I really like to be competitive, and I really like to succeed. Does that make me a narcissist? And it's sometimes the understanding shades. There's healthy narcissism. We can have these little shades. But the core thing that made me really paranoid and worry was what you just said about the love bombing. When I met Rich, I was like buying gifts. I was learning everything about him. I was like so obsessed and so 24/7. And that had happened to me in a friendship that had really ended up hurting me quite deeply. And it was really confronting to go, am I love bombing?
Yeah.
But I think for me, the difference was, I think when it was love bombing, the intent is to manipulate. Whereas when it's your sort of ADHD obsession, you're just like a little kid at the candy store. There's no intent to harm. It's just you absolutely obsessed with that. So like the intent is important, I guess.
It's really important. And I think you've just said something very key that's worth kind of highlighting, is that awareness. You stop to ask yourself the question.
I remember Dr. Mark said, you will never, ever find a narcissist in therapy.
Yeah.
Because they won't ever admit that they need it.
Oh, great.
You're not asking the question. Yeah. True.
And really?
Yeah, and again, I think, I can't remember the statistic in my head, but it's people that are actually diagnosed with a narcissistic personality disorder. It's so small. It doesn't mean to say that they're not, in the global sense, they're not out there and there's narcissistic patterns of behaviour. But I do think it's quite worrying how it's just thrown around, because it is a clinical diagnosis, and saying someone's narcissistic is not saying that someone's actually ruthlessly ambitious. You know, people may do things that you feel manipulated by, but have you played a role in it? There's also people being confident, vain. That's not necessarily narcissistic. So again, I think that it's okay that it's kind of become like a popular word, but I think from a definition perspective, when you are in a relationship with a narcissist, or you are, around them for any length of period of time, it is super destructive, super dangerous, and it's not a healthy relationship at all. And it's very different to people being a bit manipulative, a bit kind of like playing on maybe your insecurities, the lengths that you might go to. And I think as well with narcissistic personality disorders, there's a deep, deep wound in that person. There's flaws, and it's protecting, and it's all the behaviours are so they are not seen in that truth. There is a deep, deep insecurity which is not shown. They do awful things, if you've been in a relationship one, to make sure that you are weakened so you won't leave them. But ultimately, it's all guarding against the self-loathing.
Very compassionate way to view it, isn't it? And it's interesting. We sort of really demonise that word and those people, and actually comes from self-loathing. A lot of neurodivergent people can understand self-loathing. It's just a different defence mechanism.
It almost seems like a bit of a death sentence in a way, because if you are unable to show vulnerability, say you're an alcoholic, narcissistic, how that's going to be fatal if you can't show vulnerability. You won't accept that you have that problem. If you have to connect and communicate and open up in order to stay sober, in order to have a successful marriage, in order to do so many things that are the positives of life. And if you're unable to show vulnerability, it seems like a trap. Yeah.
And I think it's not even you definitely can't show vulnerability, but you can't even really go there for your own self. I think a narcissist would find it very hard to be with themselves. But definitely hard to be with someone else, because they can't relax, just in case. You've always got to stay a step ahead.
You're going to attach to the narcissist, and the narcissist will never show responsibility for anything. It's only going to compound that feeling that you're broken.
And a bit like the ADHD hypervigilance, spotting stuff, smelling in the wind like, is something about to turn? How do I not let that happen? I think it'd be fair to say that a narcissist would detect before you would even know. That's a vulnerability I can manipulate. And again, not even consciously, let me just be clear. Because I think that's attributing too much intention in a conscious way, which I don't think would be narcissistic personality disorder. That would be more psychopathic. Again, I'm not a psychiatrist, so it's not really my specialist area, but I think it's not an intentional thing. It's just, again, living on their wits to survive and finding ways to keep the upper hand.
Do you think your high sensitivity and empathy, Rox, could have been abused in the past, in previous relationships?
Yeah, and I would also add in some negative qualities and some stuff I've had to work on. So I've had a couple of relationships, situations where I would say I've been emotionally abused, and used, stolen from, pretty bad situations. But my silence, I was complicit. I didn't have any boundaries. So actually, I've had these kind of stories for years of I was abused, full stop. And now I'm like, how do I stop that from ever happening again? And actually trying to learn how in a moment of being uncomfortable to say it out loud, to not always put the other person above. But I stayed in places way longer than I should have out of desperation to be seen as nice and grateful, especially if it comes after a period of love bombing. You feel attached, you feel you can't leave. So I stayed in places like a really long time and had people kind of, drain a lot out of me. And actually the empathy can become really dangerous because you're like, but I know the story, I know the history, I know the wound. If I just stay and we just talk, and the same thing would happen. And it's crazy making. And it gets worse and worse until it actually breaks you down as a person. So I think it's definitely something to just be aware of, that if you have low self-esteem, you're very vulnerable to people perhaps spotting that in you.
It is, and it's that self-awareness point that you made earlier, Alex. The more we know about ourselves, the more data points we have, and we can at least check in with ourselves.
I think studying like your knee-jerk reactions, because that's often like a step ahead of your perhaps masked reactions. Because you know if someone does something bad, it's the right thing to tell them off or to react in a certain way. So you'll do that, and that could be a mask.
Yeah.
But your knee-jerk reactions is your subconscious.
Yes.
Like listen to the knee-jerk reactions, because that's probably more attuned to your core.
Ignore them at your peril.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's where the self-awareness is key, because then you can at least verify, because sometimes the knee-jerk reaction might be activated but not present in that person, but there's something they may have done, a small movement that kind of activates something. But at least you know to check. You don't have to go, I'm never going to see that person again, or into a relationship or work with them. But it allows you to validate, check, sit with it. Definitely don't ignore it. But as you said years ago, that would have been something that you'd have been drawn to before, you'd have been in it before you realised.
Yeah.
That's so amazing that you've got that recognition of the pattern to protect yourself when you encounter that person, that type of person.
Yeah.
Again, I think storing that pattern recognition skill it's like a database of awareness. And I think, the older you get, the more acute and focused that is going to be. And therefore, you can act and make decisions that are going to be in your best interest more and more. Are there anything you'd like to ask each other?
So I do have a question for you, which would be for parents listening to this, hearing me speak about all the struggles of alcoholism, self-hatred, self-harm that I've gone through as a result really of being missed in diagnosis and not having that emotional parenting. So my question would be, what 3 pieces of advice would you give to a parent of an ADHD child so they don't have to go through what I've gone through?
It's a good question.
It's a great question. And it's going to take a moment, because it may not be easy to do.
Yeah.
Because in that ADHD household, the chances are one of the parents may be ADHD, and also it can feel out of control depending on how that ADHD manifests. And I think that it's about see best you can your child. And when the behaviour is in full-blown active mode, whatever that is for your child, whether it's repeat worrying, won't go to bed, or whether it's being too active or naughty, look behind the behaviour and kind of go, what's their pain? And not feel fully responsible for having to fix that pain, because you're a parent, you're not a magician, you're not a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a saint that can be patient in all situations, but understand it's coming from a place of pain. And as much as is reasonable to do, even if it's not in the moment because your buttons are being pressed, go away, think about it, and try and talk out of that situation. Don't do it alone is another thing I would say. That village raising a child. Sometimes it does feel like you're alone. Sometimes you literally are alone. You've got no family around you. You're raising your children or child on your own, and it is a constant struggle, whatever your scenario. But there are resources out there, even though getting a diagnosis, as we know, is really tough. Might take ages, but get resources. See what support groups are out there, online groups, because it's very lonely and isolating if you're doing that. And I would also say, coping strategy, for me, routine is one of the things that we can do. And understanding the parent may not be able to, but it'd be putting in routines. Structure, stability. The rest can plug in from that. And it seems really mundane and it might be really overwhelming knowing where to start. Even just having a same bedtime routine every day doesn't mean say everyone will follow it.
Yeah,
but that
trying to have that,
consistency and safety, because that acting out and the anxiety is exacerbated without the boundaries, without the routine. So if nothing else, that would be the first place I would always start. Pick your battles wisely. And if your child's not eating certain foods, choose one thing, stick with that, do it for a few weeks. The other stuff can wait. Don't do it all at once. It's too much for all of you.
Yes.
love it. If kind structure, 100%. And the first bit as well, which just means so much to me to hear. So get support and don't do it alone. Boundaries, but see the child. Because I feel like my behaviours, my naughty behaviours, just made me a vessel of annoyance and naughtiness, and my whole essence and softness went. But to be seen, and it's well difficult if they're being naughty, isn't it?
It really is. And that's why you have to do sometimes outside of that moment.
Yeah.
And maybe have an offline conversation and go, what's going on there?
Yeah.
And also sometimes, again, you're so in it as a parent a lot of the time, but checking the data points. What might be leading to certain times of day where your child's really going off? Is it as soon as they've come out of the classroom where they've been pent up having to sit down all day and then they're really challenging to be at home with? Or maybe there's a pattern there. Maybe they're overstimulated. Maybe going somewhere where there's noise might not be the best thing if that is going on. So you could change what you do straight after school. Go into a quiet place. There's data in there if you can think to look for it. Sometimes you just don't know how, or no one tells you that you can.
Yeah.
And there'll be times when maybe your child's particularly hungry because they haven't eaten all day because they didn't like the food. It's not an unusual thing with an ADHD child, especially if you've got other stuff going on. So when they get hungry or dehydrated, they may be really dysregulated. That is something that could be soothed, if not removed. And I think that when you track those patterns, you can start to go, okay, that doing too much over a weekend has tipped us. They may be feeling really anxious about being late. And that might not look like anxiety. They might be anxious about the fact that there may not be something they need in a particular order that helps them feel safe.
All of those things, like any one of those things, the kid is going to see as being cared for and understood and not a burden.
Yeah.
So there's so much, there's the actual, are they hungry or are they overstimulated? But it's that you would even notice and not write them off.
Yeah.
So,
ADHD doesn't stay the same all the time, does it? It fluctuates how it manifests. So there will be things that you can pick up that exacerbate or soothe.
Yeah.
And that might change on time, but I think that would be helpful.
You just reminded me, I met a mother when I did a talk in a school, and she said she bought her daughter a teddy bear, and the teddy bear had written on its chest, "Never too much." And she explained that she meant that the daughter was never too much, but also nothing that the daughter wanted to go to the mum and ask, problems, issues at school, nothing was too much. Come to me about anything. I remember the mother explaining the meaning behind the teddy after I did this talk. And I thought it was just, a nice bit of...
That's beautiful.
Love it.
And, I mean, a bit like the workplace, making it safe to come with any issues, etc. Really doing that in practice can be tough. But if you can, I mean, wow, brownie points all round. Like, lucky child to have you as a parent. Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Great. And I think it's knowing small things. We can't always do it all. We're not going to get it right. And beating yourself up because you've screamed or shouted, get out of the shame,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
know you're doing a good enough job.
Big time.
Easier said than done, I know.
No, it's truly fascinating. I've got a closing tradition where I deliver you a letter from the previous guest, and they've written
Exciting.
3 rules to live by. They posted in that postbox,
Okay.
but through the magic of time travel, I'm going to deliver the letter to you, Rox. And if
Okay.
you could open it and read out the previous guest's 3 rules to live by.
3 rules to live by. Never go to sleep on an argument.
Good.
And give and get a hug daily.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's
Come
good.
on, I'll have 10 of those.
Yeah.
Any help with that one?
Laugh at yourself. Don't take yourself too seriously. Yes.
Love it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, simple,
Yeah.
profound,
Big time. That is profound.
amazing.
Thank you.
Jo, Rox, thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for
It's
having
been
us.
great.
Thank you, guys.
Enjoyed it.